Good afternoon. I'm Mary Jo Clark. I'm the instructor. I've been with the library 6 years already or more. I can't begin to count. We're exploring different ways of using watercolor pencils with other media. We use the regular watercolors, the Crayola, the ones that you had in school, the inexpensive ones. They're fairly cheap. They're like $2 at the drugstore or wherever. However, I have a suggestion, and this works really well. These are primary colors and they're really bright. If you go to Michael's or some other art store, or you go online, Cheap Joe's or whatever, you can get watercolors in tubes. And two colors that are a must-have in order to change the hues of these cheaper paints is Payne's Gray. It's P-A-Y-N-E-S, gray, and Chinese white. This white paint in here, it doesn't have enough pigment in it to make it white. So the Watercolor Society of America allows you to use a white ink or a Chinese white. And it's watercolor in a tube. These are fairly expensive. They run around $5 or so. But these will change this into magic. And I'll demonstrate when we get to the project for today. Today you need salt. I use Epsom salts. You can use any kind of salt. You can use kosher salt, table salt, doesn't matter. What it does is displaces the paint and makes patterns like snow on your picture. Masking fluid is good if you have some. This is used in all fine art projects. This is fairly expensive. Also, you can get a less expensive variety, but you can also use rubber glue that you can peel off. It's a rubber cement. It's in the kids section. We're going to use a natural sponge today and your number 8 Taklon brush. And you're going to use watercolor pencils. I suggest think fall, think leaves, think all the different fall colors, your browns and golds and yellows, and put a little red in there and stuff. Maybe set some pencils aside so you can grab them quickly. Also, the Micron pen, a .02 or ultra fine if you have another brand other than Micron. They don't have the decimal points. Also, what's really fun are daubers. These come in a package with different sizes. It might be in the stamping section. If not, you can ask them. It's not in the fine arts. It comes in a bag and a kit. It's usually like with the stamps and the inks and things. This is not expensive at all. And then you're going to need your 140-pound watercolor paper. This is 9 by 12. You don't need anything bigger than this. If you want a huge sheet, you can go crazy later, but for this project, you only need the 9 by 12. And don't forget your pencil sharpener for your watercolor pencils. And I think we're set to go. I wanted to show you how the salt works before we get into the actual project. When you reconstitute the paint in this little pot, you only need 1 drop. 2 at the very most. You don't want soupy. All you want to do is get the watercolor paint in this little pot. Soupy, gooey. But you don't want it watered down because you want a lot of color. This you use with the salt. Watercolor pencils are labor intensive. You can use those too, but you really don't get enough pigment down. So you let those sit for a minute. I'm going to use just a small. I wanted to show you that they do have watercolor paper in smaller sizes. So if you just wanted to play and you didn't want a big, or if you're intimidated by the size of a larger piece of paper, you can use these. This is great for journaling and things too. This is 5 by 8. Okay, so this should be gooey. I'm just going to grab any old thing here. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. Now the paint is shiny when you look at it. That means it's wet. If it's dry, this won't work. When it's shiny like this and you first put it down, you just put the salt on it. You can see that it changes. I don't know how good you can see that. You can see that it changes shape already. We're going to let this dry because it's cool and damp. It's not hot and dry. So I'm going to put this aside and I'll show you what that looks like later. When you're out walking around and you look at the leaves that are going to start to fall pretty soon, or the ones that already have, you see patterns, you'll see color. These don't have a lot of color on them yet, but I press these. If you have an ancient phone book or a large book that you can put leaves in that are heavy, or you can put paper down and put the leaves and then put like books on top to press the leaves. It takes about a week to get the leaves to be dry. These I pressed in a hurry, so they're just a little fluffy. They should be completely flat like this. And what you're going to do is kind of play with them and put a design on paper. I've painted on silk and done designs on silk with leaves. It's really pretty. So, I mean, you can lay them down in a pattern like that, get an idea. Can you see pretty well what I'm talking about? You're just going to lay them down. So because these are overlapped, you can only do one at a time. So I've decided I'm going to use these 4 leaves, and I'm going to trace this on the paper. I'm going to use my micron pen. Now, when you're overlapping, I would leave space I wouldn't take your lines all the way over. If you know you're going to overlap a leaf here, leave the lines open just for aesthetic's sake. If you cross over the line, you'll see what I mean. It doesn't look pleasant. And I'll pick this up and I'll show you what I mean. See, that was the original leaf there. and then I wanted this leaf over it. So I left this space open, didn't close the line up, and I drew this leaf over. Now, if you want to finish the leaf, you've got the pattern here, you just put the leaf back and finish the other one that you were doing, and it's very pleasing. So I have more space here, and I have other leaves. I can put a leaf behind with no problem. Just remember to stop your line where the other leaf starts. So it's really nice to put some leaves in front, put some in the back, put some to the side. You can even have one in a different section of the paper altogether. It's a design element, and if you're doing silk or fabric, it makes a pleasing design if you're going to use it on a piece of clothing or something. I mean, the techniques that you use here, you can use for a lot of different things. Okay, so I've got the 3 leaves here. I want to put one down. So I've used my paper, and it's a pleasant design. So I'm going to put this little guy behind everybody here. It's easier to put them behind than it is in front, but I had to show you both just in case you want to do it the other way. And you don't have to be really careful in this stuff. You can play with the design. It doesn't have to be exact. Okay, so there you have a design. You're ready to rock and roll. Now, you can put the veins in now if you want, or you can wait till later. If you look at the leaves, it's got a beautiful vein pattern and stuff. You don't even have to try and imagine how these things go. The patterns are already there for you. But what I like to do is kind of paint this in first, because I don't want to stop and have a line and have halos. I want this to look good all the way across. So I'm going to mix my colors. And you can mix any kind of green you want. And on this sample paper, I'm going to show you the difference. Here's what the paint looks like directly out of the little pots. See how bright it is? This is like an olive green for the leaves, and it's just more pleasing to the eye. So I put just a smidge of the Payne's Gray down in the lid, and I'm going to mix a little bit of that green color with the Payne's Gray. Look at the difference. It tones it down. It makes it pleasant, and it makes it like fall. It's not a bright, obnoxious green. So, when you're putting the paint down, you can just spatter it if you want. If I'm using the watercolor pencils, it's easy to spatter if you take the wet brush at a 90-degree angle and you just angle it down, and you can hold it close to the paper. and just spatter. It makes a nice, I can't hold this up, it's gonna dribble, but you can see. Now, in the background, I have spattered paint where I don't want it. So this is to fix a problem, fix a mistake. I'm going to take plain water and rub it around and then blot it off. And it takes those spatters off the page where you don't want to see them. But you got to do it quickly. Once they dry, it's going to stain the paper a little bit more. But that's one way to fix a problem. When you're painting in watercolor, if you use the watercolor pencils, or if you use this very lightly, if you're using heavier pigment in the more expensive tube paints, the paint stains the paper quite readily and very fast. And sometimes you can't fix it. But plain water does a lot. And even if you get this to the point where you have a color on here, you can always go darker. You can't go lighter, but you can always put a darker color over. So you can see the spattered leaf. Now I have to let that dry. This isn't quite ready yet. This is still, the salt is still drying, but you can see what it's doing. It's making a pattern on there. It's sucking up the paint. What's really nice about watercolor pencils is you can use them dry. So I don't want to leave this leaf just spattered green. And if I do this lightly, I use the side and I go very lightly. Don't score the paper. If you do, the paint will have a tendency to stay in that line and you can't mute it. You can't mix it. You can't move that paint. It'll stay in that groove and it will ruin your painting. So the green is already on here, and I can go right over it with the orange. Now, if I want this darker, I can keep changing the color. If I wanted red, I can add red. You don't press hard. You go in kind of an oval overlapping stroke. The harder you press, the darker the color, but you're not scoring the paper. So you can go darker, as dark as you want to. If you wanted to, you can load your brush, which is putting a moist brush to the dry pencil and loading the paint or putting the paint onto the brush. So this is just like dipping it in here, only you're taking it from your watercolor pencil. You can cover more territory this way. And you use the tip and you go very lightly. You don't press hard, don't scrub. It's very easy, relaxing motion. And you just move the paint around. Not labor intensive. You don't keep going back and getting water because you don't want to ruin the green spots that you already put on the leaf. You want to leave those intact. So if you soak this with water, you would lose all the texture that you just put in the leaf. If you go over the line, you just add plain water, and it takes that mistake away. Now, I've put a different color here, and it's dry, and all I do is take my damp brush and I can move that color. So you have to use your imagination with colors, but this is the leaf, and you're adding just a little bit of pizzazz to it. Will get a little bit more intense as we go along. So you can use your paint in the pot. Now, I put a bright orange. If I don't want a bright orange, I have that Payne's Gray. Look at that. It changes it. It tones it down. You can get texture by bobbing your paintbrush on the page. This is like a stippling effect. It also gives you texture. It's a quick way to get the paint down. So you have a little bit of rough edges in here. So I would take your watercolor pencil and kind of go along the edge and clean them up a little bit, make them a little bit sharper, maybe add a little bit more color to certain areas. Play with it so you know what you're doing. If you get it too dark, take a little bit of water and mix the paint into the background a little bit. When this dries, we'll put the veins in and then we'll add some more. But what I wanted to do is a little bit of the masking fluid. With this, see how rubbery this is? You don't want to put this on your paintbrushes, trust me. You want to use a Q-tip or something, otherwise your paintbrushes are going to turn out like this, like rubber bands. So be really careful when you're using the masking fluid, otherwise all your investments are going to be for naught. So I got a Q-tip, and I shook this up, and I'm going to just randomly dab some lines on here, some dots, just to show you what this is like. And that has to dry. So while that's drying, we can go to another leaf. This one's wet, this one's got goop on it. This one, maybe we'll put some salt on just for giggles. But I'm going to change the tone. This is just a blah green, and it doesn't look pizzazzy enough. I'm going to add blue. Now, blue is really a great color to bring out orange. I'm using the side of my pencil to get some pigment down. But yellow and orange really pop off the page when you add blue. And it doesn't matter what kind of blue. I'm using like a gray blue, ultramarine blue here. But all these pencils have different names. So you just have to go by, if this pleases you, this is the color that makes you happy, go for it. Because you'll never be able to keep up with all the names. Each manufacturer has a different name, and they make them so complicated, it's ridiculous, and you can never match them. They're standard like ultramarine blue. That goes across all different paints. You'll find that in acrylic, you'll find it in oil paint. It's the old standard, old world standard. So I added blue there. I'm going to put some purple in there because I want a darker color. I want to offset this. Don't score the paper. You're just putting pigment down. It's just like taking this and wiping this across the page. I'll show you. It's just like doing that with the paint. But you got paint already down here, the dry paint from the pencil. So I want to add enough water that it's kind of runny. And right at this point is when you add your salt. You can't go into the phone or go to the bathroom and come back and do this. You have to do this. So you have to make time to sit for a couple minutes without being interrupted. Let's see if this works yet. Yeah. Okay, I pulled off the salt, and you can see on this blob of paint that we did, what it does to the paint. The salt kind of absorbs the paint and leaves a white spot behind. But this is something that's fun to do. And while we're waiting for this to dry, this looks like a fish to me. So I'm going to turn this into and this is fun for the kids to do. So from nothing comes something. See, got a fishy. And that's just from a blob, an accident. But you can see things, the kids can see animals in it, you can do this. This is good for your brain, good for imagination. When this dries, you can go back with the pen and kind of make the lines a little crisper. But how fun is that? Does that turn up really good? Can you see that? That's just one of those funny things. Okay, this is coming along. You can see how the salt has changed this a little bit. This stuff isn't quite dry yet. I'll go for the big leaf. Now, this one I'm going to make like a mossy green. I'm thinking maybe I'll do what the brown is here. You're looking at this, you want a color that's going to be pleasing. So we'll go maybe with the natural. See how that works. So I'm going to mix a little bit of orange with brown. And I'm going to try and get that Payne's gray in there. Yeah. Now this leaf is kind of textured already. It's got kind of modeling and stuff on it already. It's kind of spotty. And it's got a hole in it. Right there. So what I'm going to do is just take my pen and recreate that hole in that leaf. And I'm going to leave that when I get there. If I want to add darker colors, at this point, I'll use watercolor pencils. See if I can get some texture in there. And this is where I'm spattering again. Remember, it's a 90-degree angle at the end of your brush and your pencil. It goes right down to the page. Now, here's the overspatter. I immediately take the water and I take that overspatter and I just smoosh my brush around just to blend it into the background and to get that spatter removed. But you can see the texture that you're getting. Don't use black. Black will kill the page and it's unpleasant, and when you're admiring art, your brain kind of shuts down a little bit, believe it or not. When you see something dark black, you get a negative response, a negative reaction. So usually painters will mix a black color, but they won't use the pure pigment black. And you can look at Artist Magazine, Watercolor Magazine, any of those, and there's articles on why not to use the black. And it's for the reasons I just mentioned. You can pounce the color on. It makes really nice patterns. You can take your finger and put your finger on there and play a little bit of finger paint. You can wet your finger, put it at the end of your pencil. Put the paint on your finger if you want to get dirty. And you can put the mold patterns that the leaves get with your finger. It doesn't matter. It's fun to do. You can play, even though you're an adult, you can play. If you get frustrated, this is a good way to get your frustrations out. It's as good as beating a drum. You can put the paper on the floor and you can hit the paint and throw the paint on the leaves on the floor. You'll get big spatters, but you'll get your aggression out. Some of the more current modern painters will do that. They'll put their canvas on the floor and roll in it, throw stuff at it, whatever, and then they'll sell it for $1 bazillion. But all their anger and frustration is represented in that piece on the floor. All their passion. So put your passion into this if you want to, and play with it a little bit. Now remember that the leaf in the back is going to have a dark shadow from the leaf that's in the front. So it's gonna have that darkness, and that'll give you a definition. If you don't put it there, it's no big deal, but it looks really pretty if you do. Just don't outline the entire thing. You've already drawn it with your pen. And we don't want this to look like a cartoon. You want it to look like a painting. So if you wanted darker spots, what I do is kind of shake the pencil back and forth on the surface of the paper. It makes jagged edges. You can take your finger, you can mix it if you want. You can take your paintbrush and pull that if you want. Just so you get some interesting textures. Now, we come to the last little guy here, and we're going to make him a green color. And he's the one that's got the masking fluid on it. So I'm going to mix that Payne's Gray guy again into some green and get a funky looking green color. I mixed light and dark green together, and I get like an olive green. And you go right over the masking fluid that you put there. So that masking fluid is going to rub right off. But you can see how that's going on. And you can see the color that I got. This goes fairly quickly. We just have to let it dry. Now for stems or anything that you have that you missed, you can put them in with your watercolor pencil. If you want a darker line around anything, you can use your watercolor pencil. It's easy to manipulate in corners, to get in little nooks and crannies. It's easier than trying to get the paintbrush in it, because your paintbrush splayls out and it's hard for you to get nice tight lines. So that's what we have so far. Now, while we're letting this dry, I'm going to take my micron pen and I'm going to put the veins in. So I take your leaf and look at it, put it right there where you can see it, and then draw in the veins. You have them to the side. Each tip of the leaf has a main vein. So the first one you do is this one, then the main vein on either side to the tip, and then you do the offshoots. You don't have to have every single one in there. It doesn't have to be precise, but it really adds to the aesthetics of your picture. And you can be whimsical about it. It doesn't have to look precise. It doesn't have to be like a mechanical drawing, for heaven's sake. It's just a little bit of whimsy here and there. And this saves you from drawing. If you don't draw, this is a good project because you just trace the leaves. And you can dry any type of flower and do the same thing. So that's what we have so far. Now, once this paint dries on this green leaf, there are fancy rubber erasers that are hard that will take the rubber cement off or the masking fluid, but it's fun just to play with your fingers. So I'd rather just go play and do this. So it just comes off. It comes off in gooey little stringy things. And it leaves, you can see how it comes off. It leaves the paper white underneath. And you can feel how sticky it is. So when you rub your fingers along it and you stop feeling the stickiness, it means you've got all of that masking fluid off. But it's really, really cool. And then you can put anything in there you want to. I'm going to put yellow in there so you can see. So if you were doing white flowers, you'd use the masking fluid in the same way. This is a good exercise to get used to using the masking fluid before you do your masterpiece. Now, you can use an eraser. If you get something a little bit too dark or you don't want quite that much pigment, you can run an eraser over dry watercolor pencil. You can't do it with the paint because it's immediately absorbed into the paper. But with this dry pigment, you're layering it on top of the paper, on the surface of the paper, and you can take some of that off. So if you think that this yellow was too intense and you want to lighten it up, now's the time to do it. So that lightened it up just a little bit, took that off. So now I can put in my veins. Now I can change this color any way I want to by just lightly brushing the pigment over. If it's too yellow for me and I don't like that, I can change it into anything I want. If I change my mind and I don't want that, I can take a lot of that off. The stain will still be there a little bit, it'll be a lighter orange, but I can still correct this. I don't have to live with something I want to throw in the wastebasket. Don't throw your artwork away. So you can always do a collage later. You can always do something with the pieces parts. So keep a box with your Onos in it. Now, if you don't like that, you could always take another color and take some of this out. Remember I said you can always go darker. So if you think you got too much of a pattern in there, and this time you will wet it. This is the final ta-da. So when you wet it, and the leaf looks like that. So for your background, you can take a light blue and don't make a halo around your leaves. Come in like at a 45-degree angle and put in background maybe. But don't follow your leaves all the way around. Light, when it strikes things, has a tendency to streak out. It doesn't follow the shape of an object when light is refracting. And you don't want this to look like a coloring book page. So I'm using the side. And I'm getting pigment in there. I'm getting color in the background. And remember that hole in the leaf, that background's going to show through, so that blue's going to show through. So I have blue in the background, it's very light. You don't want it to overpower the leaves at all. You want it to be subtle and kind of fade away. So now, what you want to do is pull the paint away from the leaf. You don't want to take the background and pull it into what you've already done. You want to pull it away. That way you keep the background paint from bleeding into your leaf, which you don't want to do. I squiggle my paintbrush because of the texture of the paper. I don't want to get into the other paint. I don't want to ruin my background color. See how I'm squiggling? I'm blending it in. I'm feathering it in so it blends into the paper. It's called vignetting. You take the dark paint and you go to nothingness. You just kind of squiggle it around. Now if you wanted a darker blue, you certainly could do that. But be careful you don't get a blue that's close to the blue leaf. So if you only used purple, you certainly could do a different kind of background. And you got spatters and you got texture in the background, and you really want that. You don't want it plain. So if you wanted it darker, you could take, while the paper is still damp, you don't want to score it, so you don't want to use the end, you want to use the side. And you could make some sections of it a little bit darker. Don't go from side to side, north to south, east to west, in big stripes or whatever. Do small sections. Add a bright color now and then. I'm kind of darkening it up along the side of this one red leaf to make the leaf stand out a little bit more. It's just too pale in the background. But I don't want to overpower again, so I'm using this lighter blue color. Notice while I'm doing this, I'm not using a lot of water. A lot of times people use way too much water, and it soaks in, and it also dilutes the pigment, so you don't get beautiful color. And I'm not going to use water. I use dry pigment, dry watercolor pencil on this to bring out the leaves with the background. And I'm just going to leave it like that. And I'm not going to go all the way around. You don't want a halo around your object. So that's your finished product. You could do as many different leaves as you want to. You can darken up areas if you want. You can play with this a little bit more. Just don't overdo it, because sometimes you get too much paint or the color gets too muddy. So you want to keep the colors clear. You don't want to overdo it. So when you're done, guys, you're done. Ta-da. Finished.